Please welcome Klaus to the S4 main stage.
Hello and good afternoon. So I see security from the European perspective. Is there really such a thing? And to take one of the key points right at the beginning, no, there really isn't. Okay, anyway, I think I'll just continue. Probably, I hope the other slides will work. So imagine on this slide there was a very complicated picture about the organization of the German cybersecurity architecture in a European context. And when I stumbled upon this graph, I was a bit surprised how many organizations, standards, and bodies were part in this game. And this really was when I decided that I wanted to take a step back and not really talk about the European perspective, but focus more on a national perspective. Because at the end, the European Union is not really like a United States. So it's really different nations with different regulations and different standards. Oh, that's it. Thank you very much. And I want to give you a short anecdote, and probably you have experienced, if you're traveling through Europe, you may have experienced something similar. So a few years back, I went to a nice Paris restaurant. We had dinner with a group of people, and we had a set course, and it was time to order wine. And apparently, I did a mistake before realizing it. I ordered the wrong wine at the wrong timing in the menu. And before I realized my mistake, it was too late already. And the waiter would give me a hard time about this the entire evening. Small mistake I made, but this happens. Now, switch a little bit in time and place. A pub in Bavaria. We were just coming with our team from a show, and we hadn't eaten much during the day. We went into the pub, wanted to eat something for dinner, and the waitress would come and taking our drinks orders. And I thought, well, this is a Bavarian pub, so this has got to be a trick question. So I said, I'd like a small beer to start off. And she looked at me in consternation, and she responded, well, come back if you're really thirsty. So this shows that how things can be similar and very different at the same time. And it also shows how a small mistake can have very big consequences. So for this presentation, I decided to really focus on our observable universe as a company that supplies OT monitoring solutions. And this is really what's going on in Germany and neighboring countries like Austria and Switzerland. So how is regulation, how is the standards and organizational structure look like in Europe? Let's first look at legislation. So Germany, we had kind of a head start, so we did our homework early. We put in place a regulation called in German, the IT-Sicherheitsgesetz, which is the German IT-Security Act, and this was put in place in July 2015. And it basically regulates cybersecurity measures for critical infrastructures. It didn't do much until later in April 2016, when the so-called BSI Critical Infrastructure Directive was published. And that's basically an amendment to this law, which says which industry sectors are affected by this legislation, and also what are the specific thresholds in size for the companies in these sectors. I'll get to this later. The BSI, by the way, is our national cybersecurity authority. A few months later, the EU NIS directive was put into place. This is the Network and Information System Cybersecurity Directive. And this is really like an overarching regulation on cybersecurity in general. It also touches industrial security, ICS security, but it also spans other fields of IT security, like regulation for digital service providers, so cloud security and things like this. But it definitely has some components which are covering ICS security as well. And what usually happens if there is an EU directive, the member states have to transpose this law into national law. And this happened in June 2017 when this NIS directive was transposed into German law. And this coincided with a second version, an update to the BSI Critical Infrastructure Directive, which added a few sectors to the definition of critical infrastructure. Then fast forward to last year. A big step from the EU perspective and from the member states' perspective, the EU Cybersecurity Act was put into law. And again, this needs to be transposed into national law first, but this is really a big step forward in terms of cybersecurity regulation, and I'll spend some time on later slides discussing what this entails. And looking in the future, and we have to be a bit cautious here. I put in June 2020, but this may be wishful thinking. Maybe this will be delayed even beyond this year. But there's currently the parliamentary process underway to pass the second version of the IT-Security law. And this will have a big impact on our business, of course, as a vendor in this field, but also on operators of critical infrastructures. And that's why I also put it here, and I want to draw at the end of my presentation a comparison between the currently effective version and the new 2.0 update, which we're expecting sometime later this year. So from our perspective as a company, which is offering ICS security and monitoring solutions for our critical infrastructure and also manufacturing customers, what do we observe in our day-to-day business as the most important regulations and organizations? So that really drive business decisions at our customers. And this is first and foremost the IT-Security Act. And this has really been a game changer for our commercial success in Germany, because many companies that, according to the definition, became critical infrastructure, then simply had to do something. And this is something which really changed the game for us. Then following it, the second most important item we are seeing is, and this is quite typical, the BDEW white paper requirements for secure control and telecommunication standards. The BDEW is an industry association for energy and water companies in Germany. And what they have done with this white paper, and it has become much more than a white paper, they basically created a document with best practice recommendations to secure their members' infrastructures. And this has been adopted, and I'll go into a little bit more detail also because this is very relevant. There's lots of talks about IEC 62443. I put it in third place. We see lots of interest. We have published a white paper ourselves on this topic, like how we, with our solution, can help implementing parts of 62443. It hasn't been fully standardized, and so we see that many of the companies who would consider a certification, they are still waiting in the ranks, and this is something which will probably gain in importance. But another reservation here is that European, in particular German companies, they are somewhat reluctant to pay for certification which isn't legally required. And I put into fourth position the NAMUR working group for automation security. This is again an association for automation companies, automation engineering in the process industry, so pretty much the chemical and some food industry. And this is still a very close community. They are working on their standards and best practices. And we see that, so similar to 62443, that in this specific area, there's talk about this standard in this working group, but it's not really having any significant consequences for deployments in the field. And position 5, I put ENISA, which is the European Cybersecurity Authority, and they have been strongly empowered by this latest EU legislation, but right now we don't see that they have a strong effect on infrastructure asset owners, infrastructure operators, or companies like us in our day-to-day business. So I need to spend some time on the IT-Security Act simply because it made such a big difference for asset owners, critical infrastructure operators, and for us in our business. So what does it mean? And it's a pretty long law, but I tried to extract the key points here. And the first thing is that it's only applicable to critical infrastructures. And what's critical infrastructure and what's not is defined in this BSI directive, which I just cited. It also extends the authority for the BSI, for the National Cybersecurity Authority, which is basically the one authority in Germany which gets all the reports, because there's also a reporting obligation coming out of this law, and which basically is coordinating every information, every learning from incidents they're observing in the industry. And two very important paragraphs are paragraph 8a, which says that there's a state-of-the-art requirement for IT security implementations. And of course, this is open for interpretation, but if a significant amount of asset owners adopt a certain process or a certain technology and it turns out to improve their security, it basically becomes state-of-the-art. And it includes the introduction of an information security management system, which needs to be certified every 2 years. And then, as I already mentioned, there's a reporting obligation towards the BSI, not only for incidents that have caused, but also for incidents that may have caused major disruptions. This is a list of sectors which are currently covered by this legislation. The green ones are the ones from the first version of the BSI directive, and on the left-hand side, these are the sectors which were added with the second version of the directive. So the sectors are the first important part of the definition, and then there are the thresholds. The thresholds are industry sector specific, but it always boils down to the number of affected people. And the number is 500,000 people, and this translates into different numbers. So for instance, in power generation, it's a generation capacity of 420 megawatts. For power transmission and distribution, it's 3,700 gigawatt hours per year. And there's a long list with thresholds for the different sectors. Reporting is a big thing. And the reporting obligation towards the BSI is done with a form, which is surprising because we all talk about digitalization, but it's a 4-page form, which is pretty complex for a non-expert reporter. And it contains information about the reporter, about the type of the incident, technical details, forensic information. And these are information which are pretty hard to gather. And to give you some ideas about the numbers, in 2018, when the law basically became active, there were 145 reports, and in 2019, there were 252 reports of incidents. And this is out of 1,500 critical infrastructure environments. So it's quite substantial for a start. It's probably not covering everything, but at least these reports, they happen today on a day-to-day operational basis. So I mentioned the BDEW white paper, and the white paper is really quite easy to read, an 80-page document. So it's nothing like the ISO 27K standards, which it is based on and also referring to. So it's very readable, and it comes with an Excel checklist, which you can go through and step by step basically put check marks into specific measures which you have put in place. And what's important for a vendor, for an equipment vendor, but also for a vendor of security measures, it has requirements, minimum requirements for systems which are deployed inside of critical infrastructures. So for our perspective, it's a twofold equation. So on one hand, and we have published a white paper on this too, how can we help with our OT monitoring solution to implement the requirements in this white paper, but also to make our solution, our system secure, we have to adhere to certain practices which are outlined in this white paper. And this has been very helpful to these specific sectors, energy and water, and it has been pretty widely adopted, and it's treated as a de facto standard. So much for a general overview of the legislation, and now I want to share a few practical observations which we have seen in our day-to-day business, and as I said, in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So everybody's talking about awareness, and during the show I've heard that we've come a long way with regard to awareness and things are improving and it's getting a lot better. This is certainly true, but if you put awareness today on a scale from 1 to 10, like 1 is nothing and 10 is where we want to be, like everybody is aware of all the risks, so they have quantified the risks and then take informed decisions. I believe that we may have improved from a 2 to maybe a 4. So it's certainly true. Awareness is twice as high as it has been a few years back, but we still have a long way to go. We have very few customers who come to us and say, well, we understand the risk, we have quantified the risks, not because we have to, but because we understand we need to do this, and now we want to do something. We've implemented these and these measures, processes, we hired people, now we want to implement the technical tools. This is simply not happening based on our observations today. And what's funny, when I compiled the presentation, I realized that there is no proper German term for awareness. I'm not sure if this is the source of the problem, but if you talk in Germany about awareness, you always hear the English term awareness, and there's rarely a proper translation being used because it simply doesn't exist. And we have this quite often with in other fields. So, for instance, safety and security. There's a clear differentiation in the English language between safety and security, which is very accurate for the specific requirements for the specific fields. We don't have this in German language. So we really have to take the adopted English terms to make this proper distinction. And as I said before, and this is also why I put this, the IT-Security Act so high in my list of affecting what critical infrastructure operators are doing, the first audit date, which was 2 years after the law became effective, really defined our year 0 in terms of, let's say, commercial success. So this was the first time where we could observe that we were selling the same thing, so the same value, to the same type of customer for the same reason. Before, we always did pilots, sometimes they were also paid pilots, but it was never really reproducible. And this only changed once the 2-year period after the effective date of the IT-Security law has passed, and many of the critical infrastructure operators had introduced and certified an information security management system, assessed their risks, and decided that they need to do something on the tool side as well. So how does the security posture in our customers' networks generally look like? Most of the business today, as you've probably heard already, is in the critical infrastructure sector. So with in the energy, in the water industry, and in neighboring industries. And in these industries, we have observed a pretty high security standard already. So Germany, Germans in general are very conservative people, and this is also something you can tell if you look at the critical infrastructure operators. So they are not usually the first ones adopting new technology, which is something which sometimes has hurt us in the past, but also, of course, this is a good thing with regard to cybersecurity. Because before they put anything online, they think not only twice, but they think it like over and over again until they are really sure that nothing can happen. Many of our customers today have an information security management system established. This is a good thing, because if this is not the case, it's always tough to tie a tool like ours in with the processes running at a complex environment as you find at a critical infrastructure operator. So this is really very helpful. Surprisingly, although the conservatism we observe, there's now a general openness for OT monitoring and anomaly detection solutions. And you can tell this also from the increasing footprint. And from our observations from today, I'd say that about 25% of energy companies in Germany, larger energy companies in Germany, have adopted anomaly detection and OT monitoring solutions today. So they are very open to it, and this is deemed to increase over the next couple of years. And the last point, which is important to not all, but many of our customers, particularly in the critical infrastructure field, is trust and data protection. So it helps us with some of our customers that we are a German company doing all of our engineering, all of our programming out of our German office. And some customers even go so far as to say that they would probably not adopt a foreign security system which they put in the middle of the network. This is not true for all customers. This is certainly not true for the larger, let's say, automation industry, but it's true for some customers in running critical infrastructures. So we also have a number of customers in the manufacturing field, so in the automotive industry, in the chemical industry, in the steel industry. And the picture here is still pretty bleak. Our observation really is that the spendings on incident response, and there are incidents happening, like you can read this in the news every other week, the spendings on incident response, they are much greater than the spendings in prevention. And that's something which is deemed to change, but it's probably still a long way to go. And we as a company don't see the same regular business as we see in the critical infrastructure sector. As part of our customer engagement, we always start our new customer engagement with an audit. So we never put our system into their infrastructure and basically hand it over and say, well, this is the system which you have to operate from now, but we do an audit. The audit always, so this audit is highly standardized. It always works the same way. So we put in a system into an easily accessible but interesting part in their infrastructure. Then we let the system collect data for a period of 2 weeks. And then we take this data and do full analysis. Analysis on the infrastructure itself, so asset discovery, who's there, who's talking to whom, but also what kind of irregularities or maybe even incidents we're observing. And this is based on all these audits we've done today. So the statistical base is close to 40 of these audits which we've done over the past 18 months. And the occurrence basically means that let's start with the first one, unsanctioned protocols, so protocols which are not allowed in this infrastructure, we find in 63% of all of our audits. And I don't want to go through the entire list, but just to take a few, an interesting one is on the right-hand side in the middle, Raspberry Pi, and it also requires some explanation. So it doesn't happen very often, but if you separate this, so this is manufacturing customers and critical infrastructure energy customers. But if you just look at the manufacturing customers, this has a much higher occurrence. And what this means is, and I'm citing a very specific case here from a customer in the manufacturing industry, we were surprised to discover an entire pack of Raspberry Pis. It was 30 or 40. And we showed it to the customer, and we thought that he would tell us what they are used for. And this was in a shop floor environment. And they couldn't really tell us. And then they did some digging, and then they found out this was a student project run 5 years ago, and it was some sort of process visualization. So they put in screens on the shop floor and used cable binders to tie Raspberry Pis on the back. And then they presented some sort of visualization, some data. And this was at a time when there was no connectivity out of this shop floor environment into the corporate LAN and into the internet. This has changed. They now put corporate LAN in place, and they are connected to their corporate LAN. So in theory, you can have internet access from the shop floor. And the Raspberry Pis, they all tried to regularly contact update servers outside in the internet because they wanted to update some of their software components. And this never happened before, but suddenly there's, at least in theory, internet connectivity, and nobody really knew about this. And they were still running on a 5-year-old software distribution. So very critical, although at a very low occurrence. So I won't go through the rest because we don't have more time here. So I want to try to give a brief outlook, at least of what we see as relevant happening in Europe with regard to regulation. So I already mentioned the EU Cybersecurity Act. It went into force in June last year, and it basically does 3 things. And the first thing is something which is very strong. It basically creates and defines for the first time a European certification framework for ICT products, for services and processes. And this is quite new, so this hasn't happened yet, and it still needs to be adopted and transposed into national legislation. But if this happens, then it means that anything which you run inside of certain infrastructures needs to be certified. So this is a very strong requirement, and this is probably a first worldwide. So I didn't check all of the other countries worldwide, but this is pretty advanced. It also reinforces ENISA, so the European Cybersecurity Authority, and gives them more power. And this also, you can also read this from the numbers. They have increased their staff from 84 to 125, and funding, the yearly funding has also increased nearly more than doubled from 11 million euros to 25 million euros. You can still say that it's not much, given how big and vast Europe is as a region, but it's certainly an improvement relative to the current situation. And it also extends the NIS directive, the European NIS directive, which already defines data security across Europe, and basically tightens regulation here, and it also has a reporting obligation part on a European scale. So I don't want to spend too much time on the cybersecurity certification scheme, but just to give you a brief glimpse on how this is happening, for every area, for every type of equipment, there will be specific working groups which and stakeholder groups which can add their specific requirements, their specific know-how and knowledge into discussions, and it is a 5-step process. And after this 5-step process, there will be a product type, domain-specific certification life cycle. What's most relevant for us and what we are really looking forward to, probably most of the critical infrastructure operators are not, because it means more work for them, but we are looking forward to it certainly. This is based on, there was actually a leaked version of this, of a draft for this legislation, and based on the leaked version, I compared what's in the current law and what's in the new version. So in the current law, the thresholds, so am I critical infrastructure or am I too small, this is a self-assessment. Now they have reversed this, and so you have to prove that you are not critical infrastructure. Then the fines so far have been 100,000 euros. For a large company, it is not really a lot. And these fines have increased to GDPR levels, so up to 20 million euros or 4% of annual worldwide revenue. And this is quite a change. Intrusion detection systems, SIEM systems, so tools, they were not explicitly written in the law, so there was no explicit requirement. They were just implicitly kind of required as part of the ISMS introduction and state-of-the-art implementation of measures. Now, in the current draft, the intrusion detection systems are mandatory. The old version had no hardware certification, and now in the second version there's also, it's not sure this will find its way into the final version, but if the leaked draft is true, then it will also mandate a hardware certification for critical assets in Germany. So this is really what's going on. We hope that this legislation will be passed this year, because it again puts Germany with regard to cybersecurity legislation in a pole position, a challenge for critical infrastructure operators, but I think overall it's a good thing for cybersecurity. So as a key takeaway, I really want to say that awareness still doesn't really help improving cybersecurity posture. Regulation is really, from our observation, what made the difference. So this is something I want you to take away. And now I would like to thank you all for being here. Thanks for Dale for organizing an event which made so many people wanting to stay all the way towards the end. And as my flight was cancelled this evening, I also have sufficient time for a beer later on the stage, and maybe even a large one for that. Thank you.